Welcome to Building Apps with ChatGPT. I'm Rob Sullivan, and I'm going to take you through the theory of large language models, how they're trained, what do they output, and how do we build something like ChatGPT. Then we'll jump straight into the practical, where I'll show you how to build your own custom GPT, and I'll use the Irish tax assistant as an example for this. And then we'll go on then to the second project, which is how you can create a clone of ChatGPT so that friends, family, colleagues can use it without having to have a premium account. And then finally, my favorite part is I get to get questions from you guys and kind of learn a bit about what you're up to and maybe how I could help you. So a bit about me. My name is Rob Sullivan. I'm an engineer and I'm interested in how AI and data can add value to businesses. If that's something that you're interested in or you want to talk to me about AI or something you're working on, you can reach me on LinkedIn at this link below here. My background, I have a master's in data science and a diploma in software development. Before COVID, I had completed a bachelor's degree in automation engineering and manufacturing design. I got the opportunity to publish research during my master's. I was the first in my course to do so. And I got to present it at a conference in Lisbon. And then it got featured on the cover of a scientific journal, which was brilliant. I have about 10 years as a project engineer and manager in the pharmaceutical medical device sector before upskilling to machine learning engineering during COVID. Like many, when you come into this field after college, you realize that there's no entry-level positions in machine learning engineering. A lot of employers may not even be data ready or AI ready. So they're looking for people who have a really good hardcore understanding of these models, the architecture of them, how we evaluate them, and then how do we safely deploy them to millions of their customers. And so in that pursuit, I surveyed 300 people on LinkedIn about their business problems, how AI could help. And it led to an internship at a funded fintech startup called Pitched It. And at Pitched It, I built an AI pitch selection tool to help the company, using public data, to help the company filter out poor applications so that the team could spend more time on providing high quality feedback to founders. And the struggle I mentioned about that no entry level position in machine learning led me to start writing this book called 50 ChatGPT Projects for Developers. And in it, I have several different projects from making auto replying email generators to PowerPoint generators, and each project is separate, but you can mix and match them for your own needs, and they'll give you a good grounding in this space, so that if you were to approach employers, you would have a better understanding of it. If you'd like to get a copy of that book, there's a link down here, and I'm sure the guys will be able to drop a link in the chat as well. So moving on, what are large language models? Well, here are two large language models. ChatGPT is one of them, and Facebook or Meta's Llama 2 is another. But these models are large language models, but they're very different. And the difference between the two, I suppose, is that ChatGPT, nobody really knows how that works except for the people working on it. Whereas Llama 2 is open source. And because of that, we have access to the research paper, the models, how they were trained, and a lot of information from that. So a lot of this talk and the learnings from that I've applied to ChatGPT to try to suss out how that model works as well. So if we downloaded Llama today, we'd get the second version, and there's several different parameters, I suppose, of them, from 16 to I have here on screen 70. So 70B stands for 70 billion parameters. And if we were to download that today, we'd get two files, and one would be the parameters file, which those values are stored from my understanding as 16-bit numbers. 16-bit floating numbers. So it works out to be about 2 bytes per parameter. So it's 140 gigabytes of a file size. And the other file is the run code. And in C, it's roughly about 500 lines of code. With these two files on our desktop, or if we uploaded it to a server for our blog, we could implement a conversational AI like we get with ChatGPT, which is fascinating to think of, which with very little work, I suppose, we get such a powerful tool. But how is this model, large language models, trained? And for us to train these models, we need a lot of data, text data. And the best place to get that at the moment is the internet. So what we do is we web scrape websites, Wikipedia, scientific journals, codes. We get about 10 terabytes of text data. We pass it through about 6,000 GPUs for about 12 days. And this roughly works out to be about 2 million US dollars. And after all of this intense work, we get this parameters file, which you can think of as kind of like the zipped file version of that 10 terabytes of text. But it's not so much the exact copy of the text, it's more so how that text influences the parameters, which I'll go into now in detail. But as you probably know, this is a very carbon intensive process. So it takes a lot of work and time, but it also has a large carbon footprint to get these models out. So I do like to think that we can use these models to help they'll have a net good in terms of helping us fight climate change. So, but yeah, they are very carbon intensive. And from state of the art, I've read recently that these are actually considered rookie numbers. So if you want to think of ChatGPT and all those other types of models, Bard and the like, you want to think about 10, a factor of 10 or more. Um, but what are these models trying to do? Well, here's an example of a neural network. And what it's trying to do is predict the next word in a sentence. And so on the left, we have, if you can picture the text encoded and passing through the model. And on the right, we have a classification, a probability of what word will come next. And in the middle, we have this hidden layer. And these nodes are the parameters that I've been talking about. So that 140 gigabyte file is are these 70 billion parameters, and each one is trying to figure out what should activate next in order to predict the next word. And in this case, I use the famous example of the cat sat on the mat, and you can see the system is trying to look at all the different probabilities and choose the one that's most probable to follow next. But if you were to try pretend to be these natural language models, like what info do you actually need to predict the next word? Um, and it turns out these models actually need to know a lot about the world in order to predict the next word. And I just grabbed this article off Wikipedia on Bundy Aki, but if we were trying to predict Bundy Aki as the next word in a sentence, think of all the things we'd actually have to learn in order to predict that. We'd have to know that, he's a professional rugby player, plays at centre from Connacht, he's from New Zealand, but playing for Ireland and is eight. Like these are very high quality piece of information that we can use to predict the next word. And these large language models are doing this fascinating. They're doing fascinating things uh, by doing the simple next word prediction. So much so that they've actually understood. Well, researchers have discovered that they've internalized the concept of time, which is fascinating to me. And so an example is where you tell the model your cutoff point is 1940, and then you ask it who won the Second World War, and it says, well, I don't know because my cutoff is 1940. So there are other examples with the likes of flat Earths and all, but it's very interesting. These researchers have observed that it's internalized the concept of time. Um, but what are the actual models outputting? I mentioned next word in a sentence, but what they're actually doing is they're uh, hallucinating or dreaming up or creating these fake documents, and it could be code documents. If there's a few Java developers here online, they might be able to tell me if this code works. But they're dreaming up code. They're dreaming up, products. I definitely know this ISBN number doesn't exist, and in Wikipedia articles. So none of these exist. Well, I suppose the black nose fish I think exists. Maybe you can Google this later for me and tell me. Um, but this is what it's generating for us, and as you can see, it's not ChatGPT. But what we can do is we can take these later and we can do some fine tuning. But the architecture underlying all of this is called the transformer model. And large language models, as you know, are not like cars. We don't really understand. We understand the mathematics behind how they work, but we don't understand how the parameters are interacting with each other. But this is what the architecture, those neural networks look like. And this is the oldest model, I suppose, the oldest transformer model from a famous paper called Attention is All You Need. And in this, Google researchers tried to translate English to French. And you can see on the left side, we have an encoder, and on the right side, we have a decoder. So BERT is like the grandfather of all these large language models. And GPT gets its name from generative pre-trained transformer. And you can see there on the right is the Llama model, and uh, it does some improvements on it. You can see there from replacing the ReLU function, normalizing in sublayers, and then the positional encoding where we use things like sine and cosine to create positions of words around each other. They replace it with a system called rope. So I have links to those at the end. You can follow up if you're interested. But what I want to you to understand is that we understand how these models work. We just don't understand how the parameters work together properly. We think they're building some sort of knowledge database, like I described earlier with Bundy Key, and they seem to have some sort of direction to them as well. So an example is the curse. So if I were to ask one of these models, uh, who is Tom Cruise's mother, it would give me a name. But if I ask it, who is Tom Cruise's mother's son, it will say it doesn't know. So there's a bit of a direction in how you prompt these models. But regardless, they are amazing at generating internet documents. And I'm going to show you now how we go from those internet documents to question and answer documents. And we call this the fine tuning stage, whereas before we were calling that the pre-training stage. So in the fine tuning stage, um, we're doing the same task, believe it or not, which is just predict the next word in a sentence. But what we do is we get a lot of people together and we collect a lot of manual human question and answer documents. And we do this through data labeling. So India, for example, has a booming industry for data labelers. I also checked last week on LinkedIn. I think there's a job in Dublin for a data labeler. So there's a lot of jobs going in this field. But what we do is we get a lot of data labelers, and we get them to come up with questions and answers for these models, and then you can see here's a bit of a UI where the models generated text will come in on the left, and they rank or they select options for the type of response it was given, and they maybe rank how the response was in terms of quality. And this is actually how a lot of the safety features are built into the likes of ChatGPT. So if I was ask it today, how do I how do I create napalm? The model is going to tell me it can't tell me that because somebody has preempted that with a question and answer. Um, and so a lot of people are playing around in the community about jailbreaking these translate because a lot of these models are trained in English. So I'm sure you can go on the web and there's YouTube videos on how people are trying different prompts to try get the model to behave differently. But it is a massive research field on what type of quality uh, type of quality Q&A documents to give these models. So picture the internet, we've got large quantity but low quality data. And now we have 100 or more documents, which are high quality conversations. And any information that we don't like, we can put it back into the model and fine tune it. Like that napalm, for example, if it was to tell me, I could then put the correct response back into a model to fine tune it. But that's how we get our ChatGPT model. Uh, it's a very human intensive process at the start. But what's very interesting is as as these models start to develop, we can start using other models to create the labels for newer models, which is a crazy concept to think of, but it's something we can do. And a lot of the open source models are doing that. And we can go one step further where we can use reinforcement learning with human feedback, which is like we give, like a dog treats kind of approach to getting the model to move in the direction or the outcome that we want. And reinforcement learning is a very fascinating field. Fortunately, it's out of scope of this talk, but if you are interested in it, I've done a previous talk before on how I built a self-driving car, and the video that's here, you can go into detail and look at the code and see how that model works. And reinforcement learning, yeah, it's definitely making uh, these large language models more powerful over time. So we have in these models, we have human feedback built into them, so we can start cherry picking the best one. But a lot of these models, the traditional evaluation metrics, the likes of Matthews coefficient, glue, blue, super glue, all of these evaluation metrics to evaluate these models, the models ended up surpassing them, unfortunately. So we had to come up with new ways to evaluate these models. And you can go on to Chat Arena and look at the current leaderboard. And here it is. It's a snapshot I took about a week ago, and I'm sure it's updated since. But I just want you to think about what what we're looking at here. Like obviously you could see ChatGPT 4 at the top is leading, but a lot of the models that are excelling in this space are proprietary. But what I find very interesting is a lot of the open source models are slowly creeping up the ranks. And the main metric they're using is this ELO metric. And from my understanding, you take a question, two models get to respond, and then you pick the best one, kind of similar to how chess is evaluated. There's other models, the massive multitask language understanding. That's another metric that researchers are using. So it's really important that you understand the metrics that the model you're going to implement uses, because you could have Llama, for example, that is fantastic at conversational responses, but it might be terrible at coding. And so make sure when you're going to say implement a Llama model, and if it's coding that you want, that you choose the right coding evaluation metric, for example. So evaluation is very important for these. But what is really interesting is that these models, when we're training them, all follow a scaling law. Um, so long as I know the number of parameters and the amount of text I'm going to give this model, I can very, with some certainty, come up with the accuracy the model will give me. And although improving the algorithms to transform our architecture, I showed you earlier, is interesting and somewhat helpful, the key is data and hardware. So I love the joke, I suppose, if you want to be a millionaire in AI, what you should really do is invest all your money in the stocks of these hardware companies, because the likes of Meta and Google and all are spending a lot of money. It's like a gold rush trying to buy up as many graphics cards as they can, or buy maybe the AI domain names for certain things, because that's everybody's trying to include AI in their products. So, but it follows a scaling law. So hardware and data is the key. So that's theory. We're going to move straight into the practical. I'm going to show you how to create a custom GPT, and I'm going to use the Irish tax assistant that I built, and I hope the guys then can throw in a link to that as well if you're interested. But moving straight into it, to build your own custom GPT, unfortunately, you need a premium account. I tried my hardest for a long time to not use it and just max out GPT 3.5. But then I took the plunge. It's about $20 a month, and I've never looked back. It's fantastic. I get GPT-4, DALI, and access to the OpenAI's custom GPTs, but also the community's GPT. So if later on today you publish your own GPT, send me a link to it on LinkedIn, and I'll be able to check it out with a premium account. So if you can explore, if you type in Irish Tax Assistant or choose the link up here, you'll see the one that I created for tax. But if when you get into your premium account, on the right there'll be a button called My GPTs, and when you click on that, you'll see this picture here, and you can see I've created obviously the Irish tax system, but also I experimented with the UK and the US as well to see what the difference was on them. But for you'll click Create GPT, um, and you'll be brought to this window here. And the first thing you need to know is that there's two tabs. And on the Create tab, you can actually, rather than trying to worry about what to type and what type of prompts to give ChatGPT to create this, you can actually just have a conversation with it. So you could upload a receipt for coffee with a client, and you can say pull out pull this out into an expense report and calculate the VAT on it. For my expense, for my purchases, and you can have this conversation with it, and it'll actually build. From my understanding, it's actually building the instructions that we see here. In my case, I just typed in like, this is your objective. Here's the process I want you to follow in talking to a user. I then added some kind of prompts for you as a user. The best one, I suppose, is like, what tax can I get back right now? And from talking to other people, I've added more like things about inheritance tax and trading crypto and doing side gigs on top of your daytime job. So you can give it conversational starters. What's really interesting that, and this is what I suppose I was able to take it to the next level, is you can upload your own knowledge documents. They can be PDFs, files, images, and for me it was text files. So I went onto Revenue's website, and Google tells me now that there's something like 23,000 web pages for Revenues for tax, which is crazy to think of. And I just scraped 500 pages, so it's about 2% of Revenue's website. And I cleaned that data and then I uploaded it as a text file, and then I tested it, and I advise you as well to, before you publish these, to also test the behavior of these models. And you can see it's slowly starting to learn the knowledge documents, and it starts to apply that chunk of the internet I spoke about earlier, and it uses all of those different features to provide you with these incredible nuanced answers. And I it's definitely helped me for tax, but I've seen other people do things like traffic management and all sorts with it. But when you're ready, after you've tested your behavior, you can click publish, or you can share with a colleague or a friend. And when you click publish, as far as I know, after a few minutes, it should appear on the store for anyone to see. So that's the custom GPT. That's on OpenAI. You need a premium account for that. But what if you want to add ChatGPT to your product, or you want your friends and family to use it who may not have the premium account? How to do that is in this next exercise. So for you as the developer, you'll need the premium account, and then you'll need to get an API key. I'll show you now on the next slide how to do that. And then you'll need a coding editor. I like to use VS Code. You can use whatever editor you like. And I'm familiar with Python, so I'm using Python. So you need to make sure that's installed on your machine. If you don't have any of that set up, there's a great YouTube video I found that shows you how to do that. But if your background is in Python, there's JavaScript. And I was speaking to a startup about a week or two ago, and they've implemented this with PHP. So it's definitely doable. So check out YouTube for those. And if you'd like to follow along with the code that I have here, you can go to this URL on my GitHub. And I think the guys will throw it into the chat then as well. Um, I create a what's called a virtual environment by using Python-m and then VM, and I just give it a name. For me, I call it VM underscore ChatGPT. This allows us to install and keep all our code condensed in a folder, and then we can bring that information into other machines. So that argument of it worked on my machine and not, I don't know why it's not working on yours. That's over now. So if you have this set up on Windows, you activate it through the scripts file using this command on screen. If you're on Windows or Mac, you can use this source command. And both should give you the same result, which is activating the virtual environment. And you'll know it's activated because the name you gave it earlier will show up here in green. And then you install OpenAI and Flask with using the pip package manager. It's the Python package manager. So I chose pip install OpenAI comma Flask. And a few minutes later, then both of those will be installed. And while that was installing, I went on to platform.openai.com to their API keys page. I clicked create new. This is like it's like a computer password for being able to access ChatGPT outside of it, so that it's very secure. So don't share that key with anyone, and it definitely you can keep it in a config file like I did. Just it was my preference. Other developers I've spoke to keep these keys as environment variables. So if you want to do that, you can paste it in here. I've hidden mine, so you can't have it. But don't forget, if you have it in a config file, to not add it or to make sure it's added to your git ignore, because I've made that mistake of accidentally uploading it to GitHub, and OpenAI flag it, and they'll actually cancel your key as a safety precaution, which is great to know, but it means you have to go back and create a new key. So with your API key in your folder, you'll then create an app.py file, and this is what you'll put in it. It looks a bit complicated, but it's not. Let me give it a whistle-stop tour. So I import all my libraries that I need. So Flask is just like a web browser. It's like a web server, sorry, for your website to live on. An alternative to that is Django. Which one should you use? It depends. I like to use both. Flask is very kind of quick and simple, but you kind of have to build everything from ground up. Whereas Django is like a fully featured framework, but it can be very restricting. The joke is that it has opinions, so you don't have to. But I import Flask, I import OpenAI, then I import that config file I spoke about earlier, and I pass in my API key. And then here I just set up Flask, and I tell it to go to an index.html file, which I'll show you now in a few minutes. And then I create this route. So if anyone goes to my website URL and types get, um, or if they type in the text prompt and hit send, it'll put the text in the URL to this get URL. And if you look here, instructions, it's exactly how we define the custom GPT. So in here in text, I just say you're a tax assistant, and I go through the instructions that I want for it. Now, I commented out the text file from Revenue's website because it's a very meaty file, and for this demonstration purpose, I wanted to show you like the program running very quickly. But I've commented out, but it's there. If you uncomment it, you can load in your own files. And then down here, I take in from the front end, the website, I take in the text from the user, and I call it user text. And then I use OpenAI's chat completion function. um, Loads of information is on on OpenAI's account if you want to go to this URL here on the screen to learn more about it. But essentially, we say what model we want to use. In this, I use GPT-4, but you can use the Turbo, and you get charged per word that you use. And GPT-4 is slightly more expensive than Turbo, the GPT's 3.5 Turbo. So definitely test the cheaper option first, and if that does the job, use that. And then you've got these three, I suppose, workflows. So a system is where we prime ChatGPT. It's no longer ChatGPT, it's now a tax assistant. We give it instructions on how we like it to behave. And then with the assistant command, we tell it how we'd like to display that to the user. And in this case, because I have a website, like a WhatsApp website, I want the responses to be displayed as HTML, but you can have it displayed as JSON if you want this to be an API or whatever. Then we load in our user knowledge. In this case, I commented it out. And then we actually load in the message from the user. So there's a bit of work to get to this point, but now we have the user's text in and we have GPT primed and ready to go. And to run this code, I just type python app.py. Um, and just to give you a quick flavor, this was just a template I pulled off the web. I typed in a message or what was it, chat system HTML code or something, and this is what came up. But I have it here just for you if you'd like to follow along. But you can go onto the web and get whatever template you want. You can see that we define some styling, how we'd like the chat system to look here in terms of colors and spacing. It's very long, so it goes on for 2 pages. Then we get into the meat of the actual chat interface. We have a window where we'll actually see the dialogue between myself and ChatGPT. And then we have an input box where I'll type text into it, and then a send button. And then I suppose to me it's kind of funny. I'm using just like very hard coded jQuery just to get text from that input box and send it to ChatGPT. But you don't have to be so brute force like I have. You can use things like React or your own flavor of a JavaScript framework to make these beautiful user interfaces. But I wanted something quick and fast, so I use jQuery. And all it does is it just takes the text from the input box and it sends it to that URL get that I spoke about earlier. So again, I typed app.py, sorry, python.app.py, and I run it in a web browser. It gives me a URL that I go to, and this is what I see or what you'll see. So obviously, ChatGPT is prompting me to enter something in. It's a tax assistant now, so I ask it, when is my income tax due? I hit send. jQuery then tells my Flask app to take this text and send it to ChatGPT. It comes back as a response. Flask then sends it back to jQuery, which then sends it to my HTML web page. So this is only 2% of Revenue's website being displayed, which is fantastic. Um, But as I said earlier, you get charged for words, and it's not so much words, but tokens. So I'll describe what tokens are later, and that's what you're paying for. You can do some really interesting things as well when you're outside OpenAI. For example, you can get it to add links for forms, but you can also get it to generate its own data collection forms. So if I was to ask it about, I'm a contractor that works in this factory as an automation engineer, how is my tax different? Can you help me calculate? It can actually create the user form for my salary, what type of if I'm a sole trader or a partnership, and it can take that information and feed it back to ChatGPT. So it can create UI on the fly, which is crazy. But it's very experimental, and for security reasons, I don't do that here. But it is something I definitely encourage you to experiment with, and it's interesting to see. Yeah, so when I scraped Revenue's website and I was sending it, we discovered that ChatGPT was actually getting about 6,000 tokens per question because of all those layers that I spoke about earlier. So obviously that can be very costly. Um, and another thing I want you to know is that your data that you send to ChatGPT, uh, OpenAI says they only keep it for 30 days and then they delete it. But regardless of when they delete it, any information you send ChatGPT, I encourage you to, security has to be paramount. So I pseudonymize, I take all that identifying features about you from the data and I pull it out before I send it to ChatGPT. And to try minimize token count and to try increase security, I'm kind of experimenting with things like graph databases where I'll get ChatGPT to actually create like database querying, pull out context and then send it to ChatGPT rather than loading in the entire tokenized database. And also, I'm looking to see maybe traditional natural language processing models. If I can take like a snapshot of your data, then delete your data, and then just use the output of that model for ChatGPT so that your data is always secure. So there's some things I'm experimenting with, and if you are experimenting with anything as well, definitely let me know on LinkedIn. I'd love to learn more about it. When I was talking about tokens, this is what we pay for. So every model can only take in so many tokens, and the more they improve these models, the more tokens they can take in. So I think the latest model can have about 100 pages of PDF. So maybe a large chunk of a book it can take in as context data before you can use it as a question and answer system. Um, but when I say tokens, I'm talking about, so we take words, so take the word small, smaller, and smallest. We can break that into tokens as small, and est. And if I use the words don't have a cow, man, we might be able to break that into do, n apostrophe t might be a token. You can see the exclamation mark is also a token. And ChatGPT advises us that, well, as a rule of thumb, every 75 words is about 100 tokens. Um, and you can actually experiment with your token count by going to platform.openai.com/tokenizer. And you can paste in or talk to it. And you can see how many characters it counts, how many tokens that is. And then you can see it actually highlighting the token. So in this case, GPT has for don't, DON is one token and apostrophe T is another. So it's actually interesting to see. But experiment with that as well because you pay per token. And when I say pay per token, this is kind of this changes a bit. So these values might be updated since I pasted it here into the presentation, but it's about 3 cents per thousand or about points, sorry, 0.3 of a cent per 1,000 tokens. I worked out that it's about maybe a cent a question if you work out all the context you have to load in beforehand. And another thing I discovered was that when you're testing, you get $18 free per month to use. But regardless of whether you're live or testing, you're still using that $18 limit. So I accidentally blew my account trying to load in all of Revenue's data into ChatGPT in one question. So be very careful of that. And definitely check out the usage costs. And I have the link down here for that as well. So here are all the references that I used for this talk. Some really fascinating things, a lot of stuff I couldn't go into too much detail, but I definitely encourage you to go and look at. And if you discover anything along the way, a few people have reached out to me in terms of what Europe is doing in AI regulations. And if you have any information like that, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd love to learn more about it. And thanks very much for uh, this talk. And if you have any questions, please let me know. We have the link here for the book. I'm trying to always improve this tax assistant. So if you have a few minutes to fill out a 3-question survey, I'd love that. And again, if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn, please do so. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob. As chairperson of the Electronic and Computing Division, I think I can say for everybody it was a very thought-provoking and an informative talk. If anyone has any questions, if you could please use the Q&A function now and pop in any questions that you might have for Rob. We're going to jump right into it, and let me pull up the screen here so I can read out some of the questions people have formed. So the first one up is from Daniel. What are the legal implications of scraping the source data?
Yeah, it's make sure that the data is publicly available, and make sure that you read the terms and conditions on each website before they. Some people have some of these websites actually specifically call out that they don't want data scraping. Funny enough, Google is one of those people. So Google's business model is scraping websites, but they don't want you to scrape its website. But there are others. I think Daft is similar, and so is Done Deal. So be very careful on how you do that. And there's a lot of great researchers out there that are taking a lot of time and energy to put together really powerful data sets. So if you do some Googling, I'm almost certain you can find some publicly available data. And Kaggle is also a great resource to go to. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Robert. We have another question here coming in from Mario. How locked in are you to one LLM, or can you move your model from one to another?
In terms of locked in, it's all based on the APIs that these large language model like OpenAI allow us. So the proprietary ones are, you're right, pretty much locked in because you have to use their library. But the likes of LAM is open source, so you're free to use that. And I definitely recommend you focus on the applications. I gave an example earlier with Llama. It may not be amazing at coding. So if you want to be the next GitHub Copilot, I might not use that as a language model. But yeah, you're not restricted to one or the other. And a lot of these, I would experiment with the open source ones first. I have found a lot of use in ChatGPT for the stuff I'm doing, and obviously it's one of the most popular and the highest leading model at the moment. So that's kind of why I focus on it. But you're not restricted.
Okay, I think this question kind of leads on to it, and I'm going to combine two questions together. Is can you run LLM on your own hardware locally, or do you have to run it in the cloud, or what
With
sort of hardware
Llama,
do you need to play around with this sort of stuff?
um, well, when we train these large language models, we need a lot of power and a lot of computation. But when we actually want to run them on our desktop, it's actually computationally cheap. So you don't need a lot of data, or sorry, you don't need a lot of computational power. I do recommend if you're ever dealing with, data processing, you at least have a 1 GB graphics card or something to work with. But for these large language models, you don't need a lot of compute power. It should run on a standard a Mac laptop.
Okay. So we've got a lot of questions about how much can they trust your tax assistants, and are they going to risk their advice when dealing with the revenue? So what sort of kind of level of trust or confidence can you have in a model like the tax
Yeah,
assistant?
and I actually encourage you to do this as well if you're building your own. So I tell it that if it doesn't know the answer, to let the user know. But then at the end of it, I also say to it, to output that, this isn't advice, and to seek out a financial advisor, an accountant, or contact revenue themselves. Believe it or not, they're actually very helpful if you get them on the phone. But this is more so to just to give you a prompt, an understanding that you might not get over the phone. For example, I was speaking to somebody that's being audited by revenue, and they were very scared because it's the first time they were doing it. And their accountant said, "Don't be worried, I do a lot of these." But that made them more scared. Why is their accountant being audited a lot? So they were able to ask ChatGPT these questions through my tax assistant, and it was able to say to them, it is regular thing, and here are the things you should look out for, and here are some good questions to ask. But yeah, it does hallucinate. I wouldn't trust it loads, and I try to direct people to revenue or tax advisors.
Okay. Next question is about the monetization of custom GPTs like the one you created. And is there a model for it, or is there plans for the future?
About 2 months ago, Sam Altman from OpenAI gave a big kind of Steve Jobs presentation to everyone. And I think that if you go onto YouTube, you might be able to find it. And they showed the store, GPT store, and they said that at the start, the GPTs that have the highest chats will be the ones that can be monetized. And so OpenAI said they'll do some revenue sharing. I assume like the way YouTube works. Um, but when you release it today, you won't be able to make any money off it. So for me, I've been using it as kind of like a prototyping tool. So if I want to build one of these projects for the book, I like to create a GPT of it and then try it out with my friends and family to see, what they're like. And it's amazing what you can do if you put something in your mother or your grandmother's hand and ask them to use it, and suddenly you see all the flaws in your genius idea. But yeah, it's a prototyping tool. You can't make money off it just yet.
Okay. And I have a question here from sorry, scroll off the screen. Okay. What tasks are custom GPTs particularly good at, not good at, compared to like the regular ChatGPT 4?
Um, I They are fantastic at writing and helping you write emails to that you don't want to write, or you might find you're terrible at writing. They're great for prompting to do some initial analysis on data. I saw one that's like a not a like a financial data analysis tool, so I could load in some bank statements and it can pull out some cool kind of information. Um, but things it's not really good at. If you go and create a GPT on creating business logos, the current models, DALI, for example, aren't great at generating text. So the image generation model isn't great at generating text. So if you ask it for a new banner for your ice cream shop, it'll get the text wrong. And I actually had a few photos of images of the book I was going to publish, but they were awful in terms of the text, so I haven't shown them here. But if you go onto LinkedIn, I'm sure you'll be able to find them. So they're great at text-based email, prompting ideas, helping you do that type of boring work or that analysis, but they're terrible at image generation, the text side of it.
Okay, this question here must be from a software tester. Is there a way that you can give the LLM tests that you know the results for the test their generation capability?
I'm sure there is, and there is a paper that I used a lot of my talk on called Instruct GPT. I think the link is in the reference notes, and they go through a lot of that. But yeah, you should be able to have a question and an answer that you want, and see kind of how close it comes to that. But it's probability and statistics, so it's never going to give you the exact verbatim of your model. You can do some fine tuning. I haven't tried it yet in OpenAI's developer panel, and you can feed it in to fine tune it. I haven't tried that yet. Maybe you could reach out to me on LinkedIn and let me know if you do. I'd love to know how you get on.
Okay, next question is how does ChatGPT handle different types of inputs, and can it generate different types of media responses?
Yeah, so one of the things I was experimenting with the tax assistant was I uploaded all my bank statements to it, And believe it or not, it wasn't a lot. It's not a lot of money in there, I suppose. I had uploaded it and I said, reading this PDF, can you give me some opportunities for tax savings? And I was able to say things like, Rob, you're driving around in a diesel car and you're not claiming VAT on diesel, and other things. You're working from home, but you're not claiming remote work. So I was able to analyze that PDF. I then gave it a spreadsheet of my VAT, of my Google spreadsheet. I gave it a photo of it, and I was able to scrape all the, the data from that. And I asked it to then perform those calculations for me. How much VAT do I owe on sales, and how much VAT on sales and how much VAT on purchases. And then I asked it, would you return that to me in a table format? And I was able to do it. I could ask it then, could you save that as a CSV file for me? And it could do that. Now I could ask it, could you generate an image for me? But I know the results of that won't be fantastic. But yeah, it's very the inputs and outputs can change. We're very blessed with the amount of customization from these models.
Yeah, one was a person was asking about collaboration, and can ChatGPT be used as part of a team, or is it very much a one person developing it?
There is a workspace option, so you can create an organization and you can add your team. I I think it's to allow, like if we're working in a multinational, we can create the organization in ChatGPT of that, add our teammates, and then we can start loading in some of our, corporate specific documents, say it was legal or something, and we can train ChatGPT on that. So yeah, there is when you get into the premium space, and I wonder actually, while I'm chatting here, can I show it to you real quickly? Um, yeah, I don't know if you can see that, Jeffrey and guys. So see this add team workspaces. So there's that option is down there at the bottom. So I haven't explored it yet, and I think there's different pricing plans for it. But if you do explore it and see some benefit in it, definitely reach out to me. Let me know. I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear how you get on.
Okay, a few more questions piling in here. In terms of ChatGPT and the mechanism it uses to scrape the internet and stuff, is that done in a two-stage process? Is there a separate thing that pulls the information and then the LLM itself, or is it all combined into one software system?
Um, Well, I suppose there's the pre-training stage, so that's where we get some text from the internet. That getting the text or the web scraping is, I suppose, one part of it. So we get the raw text and we do some data cleaning on it to create the text data set, and then we feed that into ChatGPT, or sorry, any large language model, and that then just creates a document generator. I have on my GitHub, I'm actually doing that. So creating a large language model from scratch, where I pick one of my favorite books, The Count of Monte Cristo. I don't know if you've ever seen that book, but it's huge. So taking all the text from that and creating a question and answering machine. So I can share the link to that if you're interested to see, but they're separate processes that I've used anyway. I web scrape, I clean the text to what I call a clean data set, and then I feed that into ChatGPT or another large language model.
Okay. Next question here is more about importing the data. Do you give a ranking or a score system to sections of data that you import?
I don't. So this is what I was talking about earlier, and that's a really really good point. I don't give ranking to it. I basically just lazy load everything into ChatGPT, and I let it parse through itself. So it will actually go through I'm calling it a knowledge file or context file. It will go through the file and pull out the context it wants, and then it will use that as a way of generating the response to the user. I am interested in looking at graph databases. So I'm going to store that text in a graph database, with nodes and edges. And then actually, if the user asks a question, have ChatGPT translate that into, a database query command for this graph database and pull out the context. And I'm trying to use ChatGPT as much as possible because I know it's trained on so much of the large part of the internet that it can come up with the right the right ranking for the context. But no, I just lazy load it all in.
Okay, that brings an end to our questions. I guess, Robert, I'll give you another opportunity to let people know where to find more about you and your upcoming book.
Yeah, so the book, I just have a Google form. If you click that link on screen here and add your email, I'll send you a copy of the book. As I said, I'm trying to always improve my ChatGPT. So if you want to go on and search for it on OpenAI, or if you want to click this link and answer 3 questions from the survey, that'll help. And finally, best place to get me is on LinkedIn. If you have any questions or found any of this interested and wanted more info, definitely drop me a message, and I'd love to have a conversation with you.